Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the collisions in cocos2d Python. So I have prepared the scene with just spaceship and this UFO head, and I can move this spaceship with the arrow keys. So here I created a custom mover class, and it just sets the velocity x and the velocity y based on the keyboard inputs. And also created a player, which is the spaceship, which is a sprite, inherits from the sprite, and setting its position, its velocity, and then applying to it this mover action. And here I have an enemy, which is also a sprite, and its position is 700x and 600y. And I created a main layer, and in the main layer I created two objects, the player and the enemy. And of course I'm adding the player and the enemy to this layer. And okay, so now let's create some collision between this spaceship and this UFO head. So the first thing I'm going to import from cocos that collision model as CM. So import the cocos.collision model, and I'm going to add it a name or alias it with CM, and also going to import the Euclid module. So Euclid, which is a linear algebra model, so it contains vectors and matrices and also sorts of operations, vector and matrix operations. So import cocos.euclid as, let's say, EU, and I'm also going to import from actions model or from cocos.actions, import the move to action and also the repeat action. Okay, these are the three imports I'm going to need. So the next thing I'm going to add to the player and to the enemy collision shape, so-called axis aligned rectangular shape or axis aligned bounding box. So using the cocos.collision model. So first to the player, and I'm going to name it self.c-shape, and using the CM or the collision model that rect shape or AA rect shape. And if you open this AA rect shape or axis aligned rect shape, you need that you will see that it needs a center, which is a vector 2 and a half width and half height. So okay, so for the center I'm going to use the Euclid module, so EU.vector2, and EU is just the name I give it here for the Euclid. And to this vector 2 I'm going to unpack the self.position, so the sprite's position. And for the half width I'm going to add self.width divided by 2, and for the half height the self.height divided by 2. And yes, add this also to the enemy. So I'm just going to copy and paste it inside the enemy class, and also going to name it C-shape, because the collision manager will look for this C-shape. So if you name it, I don't know, just shape, the collision manager won't find it. So that's why I'm naming it C-shape. And just... Okay, so now we have for the player and also for the enemy an axis-aligned rectangular shape. And the next thing I'm going to, when I move the player, I'm also going to update always this C shape. So here in the mover's step event, or yes, I'm going to add self the target, and the target is the player. So self the target dot C shape dot center will be equal the EU dot vector 2 and unpack to this the self dot target dot position dot position. Okay, so that now we are moving also the collision shape with the sprite. And what else I wanted to do is, yes, here in the main layer I'm just going to add collision manager, so self.col_manager will be equal to the cm.collision manager brute force. Don't use this collision manager because this is just an interface. So if you want to use it, you need to implement all these functionalities which are inside. So this collision manager is only for custom collision managers. But I'm going to use this collision manager brute force. And yes, I'm also need to add an update method here in the main layer. So I'm going to define an update with dt or the delta time. And here in this update, I'm just going to ask or check if the collision manager if self.collision manager that they collide, they collide, and the self.player with the self.enemy. So this function from the collision manager will check for this C shape. That's why I named it C shape. So if you go to this, here you can see that return object1 that C shape overlaps object2 that C shape. So if this is true, I'm just going to print out something. Colliding. Okay. And also we need to schedule this update. So here I'm going to, yes, here. I just forgot the syntax for it. So I'm going to check it here in my tester files. Let me see it. Yes, here it is, main scene that schedule interval. Okay, I'm going to copy this and paste it here. So main scene, that schedule interval, and yes, I'm going to move the game layer above. So schedule interval, game layer that update, which will schedule this update function 60 times in a second, so 1/60. Now let me run it. So now when our spaceships collides with the UFO head, it should print out the colliding. And yes, it prints out colliding. Okay. Now to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to add, if it is a collision, I'm going to set the self.player .color equal to 255 on red and 0 green, 0 blue. And if it is not colliding, so else self.player.color reset it to its normal, or is 255, so reset to its normal color, 255, 255 and 255. So let me see it. So now when we are going to collide with the UFO head, the player sprite turns to red. And let's make it even more interesting. I'm going to move the enemy, so I'm going to add an action. So self.do and self.do, and let me see. I'm going to apply repeatedly the move to action and the move to let's say 100 on X and 500 on Y in 2 seconds, and when you are finished, then move to tuple of 1000x 500y in also 2 seconds. Okay, so now it will repeatedly apply these 2 movements. Let me try this, but now, as you can see, the collision won't work because we are not updating the collision rectangle for the UFO head. So our player ship no more flashes. The UFO head's collision rectangle is still somewhere in this position. So if I go up with my, as you see here it is the UFO head's collision rectangle. So we need to move this collision rectangle with the UFO head. So that's why I'm going to just add the custom update method here. So update. But because the update also exists in the sprite, I'm going to name it update underscore. So in the update underscore, I'm going to set the self.cshape that center equals eu.vector vector 2, and unpack it to the self.position. And now it should also, of course, we need first to call this enemies update method here in the main layers update. So self.enemy.update, and don't forget to call this with the underscore. So first we updating the enemy's rectangle, then we are checking if they collide, if the enemy and the player collides or not. And let me see, now it should collide no matter where it is our player ship. And one more thing I just wanted to talk about is this collision manager I created here, the collision manager brute force. Of course you can go to the source code and just read through it. Technically you don't need to use this. You can just comment this out, this line. Of course now it gives here an error, so I'm going to comment out this line as well, and instead of, I'm going to add another if statement without using the collision manager and just calling the self.player c-shape.overlaps method. And if self.player.c-shape that overlaps the self.enemy.c-shape, and now it's a little bit simplified, so you can use the collision manager because it has, I think, much more functionalities than just using this simple method. But if you want just a simple axis-aligned bounding box collision detection, you can use it with this line and it will also work. So just briefly, this was the introduction to the collision detection inside cocos2d Python. And yes, I don't know what I'm going to cover, but I think that this is the 20th video in this series, so for a certain time, I don't know how long, I'm just going to do another things. I mean, I'm going to do videos, but not about cocos2d Python. So thanks for watching and have a nice day.